Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we shall be discussing the prospects of the Gaza ceasefire, which could also see some of the Israeli hostages return home to their loved ones. And in this program today I'm joined by my good friend Sharon Klaff from Campaign for Truth. Sharon, Happy New Year. Great to see you back on the Middle East Report, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for having me back.
It's always a
pleasure.
Happy
New Year.
Thank you. Sharon, you've got an exciting project that you've been involved in, and this is a new documentary that you've been working on that looks at the horrors of what happened on October the 7th. I think this is the first time publicly this has been discussed. So you want to share a little bit about your exciting project to bring the truth of the horrors that occurred on October the 7th, 2023, the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history and the largest murder of Jews in one single day not seen since the Holocaust over 80 years ago.
Okay, so when 7/11 happened, like most people, I was completely stunned. I couldn't believe what was happening in Israel. And I became kind of silent. You know how active I've always been? Well, I became very silent. I couldn't write, I couldn't speak. I was just looking and looking and looking for news of what was going on. And I discovered, just a thought entered my head that we were watching social media and we were watching snippets of what was happening. So you'd see a little GoPro and it would go along like a ticker tape, it would move on. And then the next one and it would move on. And it struck me that all of these happenings, all these episodes were dissipated and wouldn't be telling the full story of what happened on that horrendous day. So I came together with Michael Kretzmer, the film director, who had a similar idea to me that how are we going to save what we were seeing on social media as a comprehensive record of that day, the historical record of that day. And so we've been working on that now for just over a year. And finally we've got the final draft that's being tweaked. And it's hard to find a language to explain it because it's a tremendous record, an archive of events of 7/10, but it's also a record of the evil that was perpetrated that day. And we've used only what appeared on social media. We haven't created any material ourselves. Everything we've got has come off social media exactly as it was reported. So it's quite unique in that sense. It hasn't got a narrator. And it hasn't got material that we've manufactured. So I'm very excited about that.
Good, and let's pray that has the impact. Just a warning as we're talking about the plight of the Israeli hostages and how we could see their imminent release as of the recording of this program. Just a warning that some of the scenes that we'll be showing on some of our news reports are distressing because they show how the hostages are being kidnapped by members of the Islamist terror organisation Hamas. Share with us your thoughts really on the prospect now that we could actually see after 15 months the return of potentially 33 hostages within days. So as of this recording today, the hostages haven't been released, but we are expecting an imminent agreement where we could see 33 Israeli hostages released, unfortunately for a ceasefire and the return of hundreds of Palestinian terrorists from Israeli prisons being released.
So this is a very difficult time. I'm very pleased I'm not the Prime Minister of Israel having to make this decision. This war has shown a lot of what was happening in the build-up against not only Israel but against the Western world. So the decision being made today has an impact on Israel, of course, but a very, very big impact on what's going on in the greater world. And there are compartments of it. They're the hostages and they're the families of the hostages, and of course everybody wants the hostages home. We can all imagine what they've been going through, how they've been kept, mostly in tunnels, I believe, how the Red Cross have not seen them, not helped them, not brought their medications. In fact, we saw in the last hostage release, they took medications for the hostages, and we found them in one of the hospitals that Israel had to raid that was being used by Hamas. So they hadn't, even then, the Red Cross hadn't given their medications to the hostages who needed them. So we don't know what state they're going to be in. And of course, we want them home. We want them back with their families, back where they can get medical treatment and some therapy, because they're going to need a lot of therapy to bring them back to a usual happy life.
Absolutely.
So they're the hostages, but then there's also the war. And is it the right time for a ceasefire? What are the effects of a ceasefire going to be? Will Hamas still carry on building its troops? So I think there are a lot of questions to be answered over this, and as I said, I'm pleased I'm not making that decision.
No, of course, because it's a very delicate balance between getting the hostages home and ensuring that security measures are put in place in Gaza to prevent another October the 7th in 10 or 15 years' time. And without that, Hamas could rearm, rebuild, and ready for another attack again in 10 or 15 years' time. So the decisions now made by the Israeli Prime Minister will have a lasting impact in the decades to come. But share with us the huge impact of the hostages being held in Gaza for 15 months has had on the Israeli psyche. And I remember almost a year ago flying to Israel, flying into Ben Gurion Airport, and instead of seeing commercial posters everywhere or advertising big commercial brands, you just see faces and faces and faces of the Israeli hostages. You drive out in Israel, and on the main billboards are the faces of the hostages absolutely everywhere. So share with us the huge impact that this has had on Israel psychologically, as they all longing for their loved ones to come home.
Okay, so I was in Israel in, I think, September, and I found it very difficult. There was a lot of tension. Everybody found it very difficult. Even on the face of it, if you see people living a normal life, underneath it all there's a subliminal sadness and anger and a great deal of tension about the hostages, but also about what was happening in Israel with the missiles coming across and so on. So it was a very difficult visit, which I'm sure you had as well when you went. I think every single person living in Israel, and it doesn't matter what their background is, every single person has been affected by this. I'll give you one example. I had my young niece came to stay with me a couple of weeks ago. She had been in the army. She was on the Gaza border. She wasn't in Gaza, but she was training soldiers to do something or other. And I asked her how they spend their evenings. And she said they go to cafes maybe and have a coffee. And I said, what about parties and things? And she said they don't party like they used to. She said at a time like this, it just doesn't seem right for them to have music and dancing and so on. So it's affected just in the way they live their daily lives, apart from obviously the stress of worrying about, will it happen again? Can they walk down the street and not be bombed? Who's going to come into their home? Who's going to raid them? So this trauma is there right throughout society. And it's something that's not spoken about. When they talk about all the people that are being affected in Gaza, they never talk about what's happening to the people in Israel, how they live their lives, how many refugees there are in Israel. I think it's nearly 100,000 people who are out of their homes. So it's had a huge effect, and I don't think it can be quantified yet. There's a lot of psychologists are required. There's a great shortage. A lot of doctors are required. There are people without limbs. It's just catastrophic. The economy, the whole society has been affected by this. Yeah.
And Sharon, also share with us the impact these hostages have had on the British Jewish community and Jewish communities around the world who are feeling the pain that Israel's gone through, because many of them have family in Israel, many of them are so connected to Israel, but also the fact that Jewish people are united around the world through the grief and the horrors of what happened on October the 7th. And you're making a film about it. And I think the only way to describe this is that we saw a mini Holocaust take place on October the 7th by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Yeah, well, a mini Holocaust, a dreadful Holocaust, absolutely. You know that I've been an activist for a long time, and how difficult it always was to get people from the Jewish community or any community to come with us and help us in the protests, the demonstrations, and to highlight what was going on at the time, the build-up of the PSC and the BDS, that's Palestine Solidarity Campaign, that's actually conducting all the protests that are happening on the streets now. So what happened at 7/10, seemed to have jolted the whole Jewish community across the world. It brought them back to unite, to put aside their differences, and to fight for, not only for Israel, but to fight for civilization. So what you see now, I'm sure you've seen the yellow ribbons that are being tied everywhere. You see groups that have been formed to release the hostages and to highlight what's going on in Israel. Regular demonstrations on the streets, or shall I say rallies rather than demonstrations, to try and draw attention to the evil that's being perpetrated not only in Israel but on the streets of the United Kingdom, streets of America, streets of Paris, the whole of Europe, where the protesters are coming out and protesting against Jewishness, protesting against who the Jewish people are, having the complete freedom to speak about as they want, freedom to speak against Jews, to say what they want about us, to make us feel almost as though we're aliens in our own society. So the Jewish community has come together. There's still a lot of work to do to try and bring the United Kingdom community, all the people living in the UK, to understand what happened, because I don't think they did. I don't think they actually get the enormity of it all.
Yeah. Also, I think a lot of praise has got to be given to two Premier League football clubs. One is my club and the other one's the rival. So firstly, Tottenham Hotspur have done very well. Okay, you're a Tottenham fan. I'm an Arsenal fan. But both clubs have actually done a lot to highlight the cause of the hostages. They produced the Jewish kippahs, or the skull caps, with the hostage badge on it here, which is good, but in the colours of the club and the logo of the club. So Tottenham have done this and Arsenal have done this, which is great to make their fans aware of what happened on October the 7th and the hostages. The sad thing is, though, isn't it, that Israel is kind of used to, sadly, hostages being taken. Obviously not on the scale of the hostages that were taken on October the 7th. I think it was 230 hostages, sorry, I believe, were actually taken on October the 7th. We've seen Israeli hostages taken before, but for a nation like Britain, this is alien. No one in our, unless you look at the likes of Terry Waite or other hostages that were taken by Hezbollah in Lebanon in the 80s, there isn't that much of a sense of this is something that we can't really comprehend. But sadly, this is something that Israel has to deal with, because Israel, and as a nation, loves life. Of course, the Hebrew word chaim, which means to life, expose why Israel values so much every hostage, every Israeli soldier, compared to that of Israel's enemies, the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, whoever. They embrace death rather than life. Just share with us how important that concept is.
Okay, so there's a very big difference between somebody like, say, Terry Waite, who was taken hostage, and what happened in Israel. Terry Waite was over there in their territory. Nobody has invaded Europe, England, America to take hostages. I think I'm right. I don't think there's a single hostage that has been taken out of their home country to a foreign country and kept in the way that the Jews have been kept in the tunnels and so on in Gaza. Here, what we have in Israel is an invasion into the homes of the people, of the place that they live in, the place that was their warmth and their comfort, where they shared their love and their happiness and their sadnesses. And people came in and took these people hostages. I think it's very different. It's almost like reading about a burglary that somebody else had and actually experiencing it yourself. So I'm not sure how much people understand what has happened to Israel in that dreadful day of 7/10, that compared to the Holocaust. So, yeah. What do you say about that?
What can you say? But I think it's important to actually know and to really identify obviously what went on. And last week on the Middle East Report, I had the pleasure of interviewing Danny Moran, whose son Omri was kidnapped by Hamas on October the 7th, telling his horrible story and how his heart breaks for his son. And he had a very small beard at the start of October the 7th, but will not shave until his son comes home. And when you actually hear the personal stories of the families of the hostages, their tenacity, their drive, their commitment to raise as much awareness as possible is so important. But share with us, with our viewers, how important it is to continue to pray for the hostages that they would come home. And we're praying that very quickly these 33 hostages, and we don't know whether they're alive or dead on this proposed list, who's going to be alive, who's dead, and who will actually come home, because Hamas are not giving the Israeli authorities or those who are intermediary, which is the Americans under the Biden administration, telling them these vital informations, whether these hostages are alive or dead.
Well, I think it's important to have faith at a time like this. If you don't have faith, I don't know how you cope with it. I don't know how you get through your day. Even as somebody who's not directly related to a hostage, if you don't believe that there's something there that can help these people beyond physical help from countries and presidents and so on. So I think it's really important to have that faith, really important. What the hostages are living through, the enormity of what's happening to them. We're talking about hostages. I remember reading about, I don't think it was Terry Waite, but at that time in Lebanon when they were taking British hostages, I remember reading how they transported a hostage underneath a car, where they'd packaged them underneath the chassis of the car with packaging tape, and they were driving around with this body slung underneath the car. I mean, this is a kind of evil. Can you imagine if they can do that? What are they doing to these people who are stuck in these horrendous tunnels, which you've seen? I mean, they're visible to everybody, these tunnels that you can drive trucks through, where they've got equipment making material there, where they make missiles in the tunnels, where they've got fridges and beds and almost like whole towns down in the tunnels. It's not just a tunnel like a tube line. So I'm not quite sure how one comes to terms with the evil, how you can bring the evil to the world, particularly as you're combating this PSC that's worldwide on the streets, a brand with their colors. You just see their red, black and green color, and you know exactly what they've got to say. And one of the things that's come out of this is this pin. I've always thought that we need a brand, and I think this pin is giving us a brand. And I think it's going to last, even when the hostages are home. This is going to be the brand as a memory of what happened on that day, a memory, what happened not only to Israel, but as I keep emphasizing, what happened to Western civilization, and how we've got to be alert and always. This is what this pin's going to stand for.
Absolutely. And let's have a look at this CBN news report that talks about how we could see an imminent ceasefire coming with Israel's war against Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, but also a word of warning, some of the images in this news report are distressing because they involve Israeli hostages being kidnapped by Hamas.
The hostage ceasefire deal is still up in the air, but the U.S. is talking optimistically.
The parties are right on the cusp of being able to close this deal. Whether or not we go from where we are now to actually closing it, the hours and days ahead will tell. But I believe it is there for the taking, and we're going to do everything we can to push it to get it across the line.
There's been a handshake, and they're getting it finished, and maybe by the end of the week. But it has to take place.
Media reports say 33 hostages would be released at the start of the deal, but Israel is not sure how many of those would be alive. The release of more hostages would be negotiated in later stages. Israel appears ready to sign the deal, but whether Hamas will is unknown.
We see some progress in the negotiations. Israel wants a hostage deal. Israel is working with our American friends in order to achieve a hostage deal, and soon we will know whether the other side wants the same thing.
Palestinian people deserve peace, the right to determine their own futures. Israel deserves peace and real security And the hostages and their families deserve to be reunited. And so we're working urgently to close this deal.
This progress comes after what the Times of Israel reported as a tense meeting between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and President-elect Trump's top Mideast envoy. Some hostage families and their allies have marched in Jerusalem to protest any deal that does not free all the hostages at once and in which Israel gives up hope of crushing Hamas in Gaza.
President Trump did not pressure us to give in to the Hamas. Pressure them to give in to us.
There is no confidence that this deal that is starting today with a number of hostages will actually continue to a deal that will have a second stage or a third stage.
Vice President-elect J.D. Vance says the reason there is progress is because of Trump's threatening Hamas.
But regardless of when that deal is struck, it will be because people are terrified that there are going to be consequences for Hamas.
Meanwhile, the fighting continues in Gaza, and the Houthis fired 2 ballistic missiles at central Israel overnight. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And that was courtesy of our friends at CBN, so thank you for that excellent report. What's interesting is when you start doing the background reading and research into the plight of hostages, what appears to be the case that has brought Hamas to the negotiating table is the fact that the ring of fire that the Iranian regime has spent decades building and they spent billions on has actually collapsed, because we see that the Hamas terrorist infrastructure has been destroyed, battalions of Hamas terrorists have been destroyed, and we see, for example, in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah destroyed, the tunnels, so many of these tunnels where they smuggled in weapons and arms from Syria into southern Lebanon have been destroyed. Israel's been able to push Hezbollah up to the Litani River. We've seen the collapse of President Assad's regime, and now after the Iranian regime fired ballistic missiles at Israel and Israel's responded, Israel has completely destroyed their air defense systems. The Russians are bogged down in Ukraine and won't come to their aid. So we see that Israel's geostrategic fortunes have changed, but it's because the Iranians have been dealt a massive blow in all of this, that this has brought Hamas to the negotiation table. Share with us how this has come about, not through Israel's weakness, but Israel's strength.
Okay, so when this first started, people couldn't believe how Israel was going to cope with the war on 7 fronts, and they were talking about that. And I think that the Netanyahu government, for all the criticism that it takes, has done an amazing job. They've managed to take the whole 7 fronts and deal blows to them in a domino effect. So one domino after the other, rather than a full-blown attack on all of them at the same time. And in doing that, Israel has done a service to the entire world. Absolutely. When you see the amount of armaments that have been amassed there, when you see how Iran had its tentacles spread just around the Middle East, you understand the danger that the world was facing, especially with Israel so close to a nuclear facility for a nuclear bomb. So the Netanyahu government, for all its criticism, has actually done a tremendous job in diminishing his Hamas, which is still there. It's still somehow getting cash from somewhere to keep making missiles in its bunkers and to recruit people. It's been recruiting a lot of terrorists to its fold, all the while that it's happening. Thousands of them.
4,000 over the past month. Yeah.
So they still haven't been quietened. I understand that Hezbollah's gone or been diminished, and I just read yesterday that the new Prime Minister of Lebanon is doing a great job in excommunicating Hezbollah. Syria, who knows what's going to happen there? There's a terrorist there in charge who's now wearing a suit. Everybody's taken away the terrorist, what's the word I'm looking for? The
clothing?
The fact that they're named as terrorists, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, in America and so on. America's lifted that. And in France and so on, they've lifted it. And I think that's because they want to send the Syrian refugees back. So if they've got a terrorist, they can't send them back. So we're not quite sure what's going to happen there. There are lots of different sections and sects and so on going on there. The Houthis, they'll be dealt with. And then it's Iran. And I'm hoping that when President Trump comes in, that there will be a regime change, even though he says that's not his aim. I'm hoping that the Persian people themselves will rise up and have a secular state with whatever religion they choose to have, but not being dominated by theocracy.
No, absolutely. And also mentioning that fact that the Iranian regime's greatest ally in the Middle East, Syria, and President Assad has collapsed with it, is the billions that they earned smuggling illegal drugs all the way from Tehran all the way through to the Mediterranean. That was very lucrative for the regime. That's collapsed. All their weapons that they would supply to Hezbollah, to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in Syria, to the militias under their control, all of that's collapsed and gone overnight. So we are seeing a huge change in fortunes there. According to my notes here, that this is according to the Times of Israel today, potentially we might see 33 hostages freed in the first stage, most of them alive according to the Times of Israel, and this is what the Times of Israel say. They said that the officials said that the first stage of the potential deal would see Hamas release 33 humanitarian hostages. These include children, women, female soldiers, the elderly and the sick. Israel believes that most of the 33 are alive, but some are dead, the officials said. They noted that Jerusalem has not yet received any confirmation of their status. Just share with us how significant this breakthrough negotiations with Hamas in Doha that's taking place in Qatar right now under American mediation will actually mean for these Israeli women and those that are vulnerable and ill under Hamas will actually finally be sent home and back to their loved ones.
Well, I think it's of great significance because hopefully they'll come home. As I said, what condition they're going to be in, goodness knows, but at least they'll have an opportunity to come home and be nurtured and healed. So it's of great significance. But how do you choose when you're having a negotiation? How do you choose 30 people out of how many are they expecting back now?
So it's 98.
Under 100, yeah.
Because two died last week. A Muslim Arab Israeli's father and his son were found dead. So I think it's 98. But they don't know how many of the 98 are still alive.
That's right. So what springs out to me is that not only is there a punishment in taking the hostages and removing them from their homes and treating them as sex slave and all sorts of dreadful things, but there's a further punishment in not letting the families know who's alive and who's not alive, in holding back on this. It highlights for me the evil that we're facing, that they haven't yet learned a lesson. They've taken a great beating from Israel. They've lost their country virtually. And yet they're carrying on with this evilness of punishing the loved ones of these hostages by not saying what condition they're in, whether they're alive or they're bringing bodies, what will the bodies look like, and then only 30 of them. So leaving behind a collection of them. It's an evil that somehow I'm hoping that the Trump administration is going to be able to deal with. We can't live in a world that's got evil like that.
No, absolutely. And I know that one of the biggest demands that Hamas is asking for is the release of Yehua Sinwar's body. But the Israelis are not actually prepared to do that. They might say we might do that in the second stage as a means to negotiate the release of the final hostages and some of those bodies that Hamas took back in 2014 as well.
2 of them, aren't they?
Yes, 2 of them, that's right. So let's see the latest report put out by CBN about the prospect of a deal being done with Hamas to bring 33 of the most vulnerable Israeli hostages home to their loved ones.
The U.S. has been positive about progress in the negotiations over the past several days. Earlier, President-elect Trump predicted a forthcoming agreement.
There's been a handshake, and they're getting it finished, and maybe by the end of the week. But it has to take place.
Media reports say 33 hostages would be released at the start of the deal, but Israel is not sure how many of those would be alive. The release of more would be negotiated in later stages.
Israel wants a hostage deal. Israel is working with our American friends in order to achieve a hostage deal.
This progress comes after what the Times of Israel reported as a tense meeting between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and President-elect Trump's top Mideast envoy. Some hostage families and their allies have marched in Jerusalem to protest any deal that does not free all the hostages at once and in which Israel gives up hope of crushing Hamas in Gaza.
President Trump did not pressure us to give in to the Hamas. Pressure them to give in to us.
Vice President-elect J.D. Vance says progress is being made because of Trump's threats against Hamas if there's no agreement by Inauguration Day. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Yeah, and it's our desperate prayer that all of the hostages come home to their loved ones. It's been 15 months. It's been 15 months too long with no Red Cross access. We know that these hostages have been tortured. We know that they've been deprived urgent medical care. They've received daily beatings. They've been kept in these tunnels in complete and utter darkness. And in many cases, many of these hostages have been horrifically sexually abused. And, we can't comprehend how horrific it must have been for them. So they need to come home. Sharon, just going to read a little bit more. So according to the Times of Israel here, that Israel is going to have to pay a heavy price for their return as part of this ceasefire agreement and agreement with Hamas to bring the hostages home. This is what the Times of Israel says. It says, under the complete ceasefire agreement, Israel will withdraw from most areas of the Gaza Strip and release large numbers of Palestinian security prisoners, including terrorists who have carried out deadly attacks. High-profile murder terrorists will not be released to the West Bank under the deal, the official said, and nobody who took part in October the 7th onslaught will be freed, the official said. I just think it's tragic in all this that Israel has to pay a huge price. I mean, the price was high on October the 7th. And then we're seeing that Hamas is being rewarded for its terrorism against Israel because Israel is having to give up terrorists, Palestinian prisoners with bloods on their hands who've committed murder against Israelis, against Jewish people, in order for Hamas to say, we've got a victory. And our honour has been restored within the kind of Arab culture in order to return the hostages, knowing that potentially these terrorists could murder again, like the architect of October the 7th, Yewar Sinwar, who was held in an Israeli prison, and he was released because of the deal that Israel did with Gilad Shalit back in 2010, I believe, when he was kidnapped by Hamas in 2006. So again, Israel's having to pay such a high price in order for her hostages to be brought home. Share with us the price that Israel has to pay.
Israel always pays a high price, and that's because of the ethos that Jewish people have, how they love life more than the enemies love death, or the other way around. So they always pay a very big price, and I think Israel is always, in a way, ready to concede in order to save a fellow Jew. You know you do know that when there's been a catastrophe, there are a group of people who go around picking up all the body parts because we need to keep a human being together, and that's the sanctity of what we believe in. So there's always a high price to pay, and it looks like they're going to pay that high price again. Hopefully they're not going to release people who were involved in 7/10. Hopefully they're going to extradite them. I think there was talk that they weren't going to be able to live in the Middle East.
Yeah, there's some talk here, though. Unconfirmed reports indicated that some 150 to 200 murdered terrorists would be freed, and this is according to Times of Israel report, and that they would not be allowed to return to the West Bank.
The West Bank, that's Judea-Samaria.
Exactly,
yeah.
But this would be the Palestinian Authority, but rather they would go to Gaza, possibly to Egypt, Turkey and Qatar.
To leave the area. so that they wouldn't be there ready to launch another attack, which I fear is going to happen, and unless this, well, you know that I have a different view on what should be happening in Gaza. I don't believe Israel should be withdrawing. I know I don't work in that in government, but I don't believe Israel should be withdrawing. There needs to be another way to find those hostages. And I don't believe that Gaza should ever be occupied by anybody again. I think that a peace plan should incorporate Egypt, and I think that the people who live in Gaza, who were originally Egyptians anyway, should be living in Sinai. They should be given homes, they should be looked after, there should be a de-radicalization program for them. And I think Gaza, which is very, very small, should become an international heritage site. So there isn't a possibility of Jews being kidnapped again, being killed again, and being taken through tunnels that are in an area that's going to take at least 10 years to reconstitute anyway.
Yep.
So I'm kind of, I want the hostages home, but I don't want the next year or the year after for youngsters to go through what they went through. I remember my niece calling me just after the 7/10 from her home, where she was frightened to leave her bedroom. She was frightened even to go to the front door to check out if it was locked. And how can people go through that every few years, go through that, because that evil is allowed to rebuild in an area that they know it's going to happen in? So, and I wish there was a way that they could bring these hostages home and at the same time not allow a rebirth of another Hamas, another reincarnation of terrorism that's going to burst into Israel again.
And surely this has to be in the minds of the IDF, this has to be in the minds of the Shin Bet, Israel security forces, to know that what Israel does now over the next few weeks and months is critical to ensure that another October the 7th doesn't happen again in a decade or decades time, or decade and a half's time.
Not even a decade.
We know that within a decade Hamas could rebuild, rearm, and then attack Israel again in the near future. And there is a lot of speculation now over who will control the Philadelphia corridor. Now, the Philadelphia corridor is that corridor between Egypt and Gaza, and having seen the devastation with my own eyes of October the 7th, having seen the fact that the only way that the Iranians could have supplied Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad with the weapons they used on October the 7th, and the scale of vehicles and weapons used, because we're talking about between 5,000 and 7,000 Hamas terrorists on October the 7th that breached Israel's Eretz crossing border and other border crossings with Egypt and carried out the mass terrorist attacks, raping, mass rapes, torture. I mean, the whole situation is horrific. But that came about because of the Rafah crossing. And the Philadelphia corridor. So we know that in some way the Egyptian authorities are responsible for what happened October the 7th, because we know, for example, there's no other way that they would have been able to get that kind of weaponry into Gaza. So in any future agreement and rebuilding Gaza, I think it's imperative that Israel has buffer zones and remains and control of the Philadelphia corridor, as well as others, and maybe breaks Gaza up into 3 different buffer zones so that we can't see the horrors of October 7th happen again. Of course we feel it's a difficult situation facing the residents of Gaza, but the residents of Gaza have embraced a genocidal Islamist ideology that is actually worse than Nazism. And that's the danger. It's this Islamo-fascist ideology that is the main predominant ideology in Gaza. And until we see a kind of the Hamasification, then there's no future for the people of Gaza. There's no hope for them. That's because they are locked into this evil, demonic ideology that only glorifies death and jihad, and that's no future for them. That's no future of the children of Gaza. And we want to see Israel living at peace with our neighbours. We want the Gaza to potentially become a kind of paradise in the Middle East, where it's got the best beaches apparently in the Mediterranean. They could build hotels, they could build restaurants, They could use that money to build schools, develop business projects,
That's right.
instead of building a terror state. And from there on, we could see that there could be a new chapter written in the history of Gaza. But that has to come to the recognition to end their war and their desire to destroy Israel.
That's why, coupled with the release of the hostages, has to be a plan of what you're going to do with the people of Gaza. And the people of Gaza, sadly, and of course one feels for them because they're suffering, but what are you going to do with the people who are so completely radicalized? And if you send them abroad, they're taking that radicalization with them. Exactly. If they go, like some of them have been in Australia, and I believe creating some havoc there. So I think a plan where Egypt has to actually take some responsibility and use part of that Sinai to house them there, and for the world to get together, the Western world to get together and start a proper de-radicalization program to get rid of UNRWA, where UNRWA has been feeding them this dreadful ideology since the 1950s, in fact. They've been educating children, dressing them up as soldiers. For 20 years, I've been watching videos of young Gazan children running around in combat outfits and pretending to shoot Jews and killing them. So that has to stop. So yes, we want the hostages home, of course we do, but we also want the whole terror network to stop. And it can only stop if people pay attention and not only feel sorry for the Gazans and say, we'll give them some homes, but to say we need to create a new life for them. They need to be taught how to think in a way that builds life rather than destroys it.
Absolutely, and along those lines as well, which is also very important as we're discussing kind of the prospect of a future with Gaza, is to ensure that their hatred and incitement against Israel is stopped, their destruction of wanting to destroy Israel and supporting the theology of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad has got to end, but also more importantly as well, I think as well, they've got to stop being used as pawns by other actors in the region who are using the horrible situation there as a means to advance their own political and theological objectives, whether that's the Qataris with the Muslim Brotherhood, the Turks under President Erdogan, or whether that's under the Iranian regime. Got a very shocking video to show you, thanks to our friends at CBN, which really does reflect what Sharon and I have been talking about, the real need for a de-Hamasification of Gaza. Take a look.
Since the beginning of the war, I've been receiving countless DMs on my Instagram from Gazans asking for help. And my first reaction has been, call me. You see, I want to know what people there are thinking, how they feel about the war. The thing is, none of these Gazans have ever called me. Until...
This is Paul.
Can we talk about your situation? What is your situation?
And in April, I decided to go to Egypt with my family. In the crusade, they not allowed to take my family and husband with me.
Where did you learn to speak such good English?
Yeah, I studied from Quds Open University.
What was the life in Gaza before the war?
All people in Gaza are happy, and we live in beautiful home. We wear beautiful clothes. We eat beautiful foods. Everything was amazing. We want to recover our previous life.
October 7 is good or bad? Sabba October.
For me, I said it's good, and they are very courageous. Give their life for Gaza and for us and for Jerusalem.
How can we free Palestine?
We can free Palestine by what did on 7th of October.
Are you happy with October 7? It's good for you?
Yes, I become proud of 7th October. I celebrate in 7th October, and we are proud of them. Yes, this is the truth.
يعني إن شاء الله كلوا رزة شهيد.
إن شاء الله.
Wow.
Hamas, for me, I love مقاومة. I respect Sinwar. He fight in the last breath to kill Israel and occupation. Give Gaza a lot.
Of course, and Hania also.
And
Hania, very good.
Hania, I'm very sad when they killed them.
Haram that they haram. How do you feel about Yahudi? Do you like Yahudi or?
Of course, no. Why? They killed our children. They stole our dreams. They demolished all our dreams and our house.
Kulu Yahudi, even Iraqi Yahudi, European Yahudi, Kulu Yahudi.
Yeah, and in our Quran, Allah told us don't respect the contact between Yahudi.
Yahudi is bad.
What?
Not good.
Yeah.
You love Hamas. Like Hamas is good.
Yeah. I love all Palestinian people. Hamas, Fatah, I love them all.
In the back of my head, I'm thinking, how does she not know I'm Israeli? These questions were so on the nose. I honestly didn't think this was going to go on for so long. So I made a choice to tell her who I was.
أنا مش عربي. أنا يهودي إسرائيلي.
أنت يهودي؟ جد؟
Israeli.
I am shocked.
Yeah, I know you're shocked. You want to have peace with me or you want to kill me?
No, you.
But you say you love Hamas.
Please. No, I love all people in Gaza, I said.
You love Hamas. Hamas is good.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
How can you be okay with Hamas?
Really, I said that because I think you love Hamas.
I don't believe you.
Look. You kill our children.
You also kill our children.
But when 7 October happened, I didn't like it. I really, honestly, I become proud of 7 October. I celebrate in 7 October. Look, I am a woman. I love peace. I love all people. I respect all religion.
Yahudi is bad, not good.
Yeah, all the people in Gaza now don't want Hamas control Gaza. We proud of them as Muqawama, as they make sometime.
You're proud of Sinwar. You're proud of Ismail Haniya.
Ismail Haniya is good.
They destroy your country. They destroy your people. They destroy your life. Sinwar is good. Sinwar destroy your life. Sinwar is bad. But we cannot have salam if you like Sinwar. Sinwar want to kill me, want to kill my grandma, want to kill my Israel is not going anywhere. Israel will stay here, inshallah, forever.
Wait.
The issue that I'm pointing to in this video is bigger than me and this lady from Gaza. It's a failure at the hands of the UN and Palestinian leadership to push their people away from radical Islamic terrorism. Arab supremacy is a real issue in the Middle East. We see it everywhere we go, from Syrian Arabs Kurds, to Iraqi Arab Muslims massacring Mandeans, to Egyptian Arab Muslims massacring Copts, to Palestinians massacring Jews. I want to clarify, even though this lady wants to see me dead, I don't hate her. She grew up with a cancerous ideology, and we Jews have good reason to believe that most Palestinians hold these exact same viewpoints.
Thanks, CBN, for that excellent report, and also that very brave and courageous Israeli social media influencer who really has exposed the hearts of many of the residents of Gaza and their love for Hamas, and how we see double speak taking place. On the one hand, we see if they identify as a fellow Muslim, then yes, we celebrate and support Hamas on October the 7th. Now finding out that he's an Israeli and he's Western, that changes the whole scenario. So this is what we need to do, is the de-radicalization of Gaza. Also, what's also very troubling, Sharon, is the fact that the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, which is headed up by Dori Gold, Israel's former ambassador to the UN, has done an excellent report titled "Hamas Recruits Thousands of New Fighters in Gaza." So they report that according to Israeli security officials, Hamas has recruited approximately 4,000 new fighters over the past month. The Hamas is estimated to have about 20,000 armed fighters in Gaza, along with a stockpile scores of rockets that sporadically launches into Israeli territory. The Islamic Jihad organization also retains about 4,000 fighters in the Strip. And of course, all this money is coming from the outside influences to fund and support Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But it doesn't look like this war in Gaza is over, sadly.
No, it's not over. And it's still building. It's what I said before. They're still recruiting. Where are they getting all these people from? If the people of Gaza are suffering the way the West is saying, and if they're forcing Israel to send all this aid in there because they're suffering so much, where are all these recruits coming from? Are they still coming under the tunnels, maybe? I don't know where they're finding, how many thousands of people did you say?
So according to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, Hamas have been able to recruit 4,000 new Hamas fighters, or terrorists, as I prefer to call them. But there are 20,000 they have fighting and 4,000 belonging to Islamic Jihad as well.
That's quite a large amount of people for a people who are meant to be completely on their knees and suffering and moving around from place to place as Israel's trying to get rid of the tunnels.
And what's also happened is that Hamas have changed tactics. So before, Israel has wiped out the Hamas battalions, and now they're reverting to guerrilla warfare tactics. So they're going back into the areas that Israel's cleared in the north and then carrying out kind of surprise guerrilla attacks against the IDF in Gaza.
So here comes a peace deal, a ceasefire. Who's going to say that they're not going to be going back to North Gaza and doing the same thing again? How are we going to trust them? Because they keep doing it. So what guarantees are there? Because the West has been unable for 77 years to give Israel security backup and to honor their commitment to make sure that there was peace there. We've had the UN there that hasn't had much effect. So how is this going to work? I can't see how it's actually going to work and keep Israel safe.
Well, that's the big question. This is why it's so crucial, isn't it? So let's have a look at this final CBN news report. And this is Hamas terrorists actually admitting that they carry out operations in hospitals in Gaza, contrary to so much of our Western media news coverage when it's covering Israel's war against Hamas.
Israel is still discovering weapons, tunnels, and terrorists in Gaza. Despite being hit by repeated attacks for so long, Hamas is still able to launch rockets at Israel. Most of them are falling in open spaces or back into Gaza, but one did hit a house in Sderot earlier this week, causing a little damage but no injuries. CBN war correspondent Chuck Holton explains how Hamas keeps their rockets hidden from Israeli forces.
They're going back into places that the IDF has already been, but they didn't find those rockets. And we have to explain to people how this works. Hamas was going around before the war, digging holes all over Gaza and making rocket launchers underground, covering them up with a piece of plywood and then a bunch of dirt.
Holton says Hamas then uses those locations for more attacks.
They go and in a place where the IDF has already been and they've cleared and then they've moved out of, the Hamas operatives will move back in there, uncover one of these and light off some of these rockets.
As Israel keeps up its military pressure on Hamas, the IDF has faced international criticism for its recent attack on the Kamal Adwan hospital in northern Gaza. But at least one Hamas prisoner is admitting the terror group used it as a shelter.
They believe it's a safe haven for them because the military cannot directly target it.
The prisoner, who was also an employee in the hospital, said Hamas operatives transported equipment to and from the hospital and used it as an observation point and command and control center.
Inside the hospital, they distribute the grenades and mortars, equipment for attacking tanks, to ambush positions, and to underground tunnels.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Jerusalem.
We also pray that Hamas would actually be defeated, because we can't even comprehend another October the 7th in a decade's time. And what Israel does now is critical to ensuring that those communities so devastated by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad back on October the 7th can go back to their communities and rebuild, knowing that they are safe and knowing that they don't have to face any more rockets or missiles or any future invasions. One aspect of this which is complicating the negotiations is, according to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, and I've had an inclination all the way along with this one, is that 30 of the hostages are actually held by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad are answerable to only one nation, the Iranians. So whereby the West can apply pressure on Qatar and the Qataris can pressure Hamas to release some of the hostages, Hamas doesn't have complete control over the Gaza Strip, and that Palestinian Islamic Jihad are answerable only to their masters in Tehran, which makes it very difficult for them to be released. But share with us how Donald Trump being inaugurated as America's 47th president next Monday, and the fact that this will be his second term could put a lot of pressure on the Iranian regime, not only over the hostages, but also their nuclear weapons program, that could see some real geostrategic changes in the Middle East that would benefit Israel in the long term.
So I think Mr. Blinken said something recently, it was reported in Washington Post or one of those, where he admitted that Biden putting restrictions on Netanyahu and keeping a space between Hamas and Israel actually caused the problem and made it less likely for there to be a ceasefire or a release of the hostages. So what we have here is Biden, who's been doing this work for 3.5 years, 4 years, knowing that what the Americans were doing was actually exacerbating the problem rather than fixing the problem. So I'm hoping that what Trump will do is to close that space, that he will be very tough, that he will make sure that Israel has got a free hand to hit hard on Iran, and Israel to help the world to get rid of Iran's nuclear capability, but also that Trump will re-implement sanctions on Iran, very strict, immediate sanctions on Iran that will actually put Iran on its knees, and that the people of Iran will rise up then because they'll be economically affected by it. So that should get rid of the Islamic jihad. And I think that Qatar needs to be treated differently because Qatar has infiltrated the West completely. Absolutely. It actually owns the West. Yep. And the West has to decide, does it want to be owned by a foreign power? Or does it want to follow what I think President Trump is talking about, where they call him an isolationist, but really what he wants is for America to own America, and hopefully that we'll get to a stage where British people will own the United Kingdom, and the same with Europe, and that Qatar will actually be frozen out of the West. And unless that's done, I think we're going to face terrorism constantly.
Within 20 seconds, Sharon, share with us how we got to continue to pray that the hostages would be released.
Yes, we have to. As I said before, we have to have faith that they'll be released, faith that we'll be able to heal them, that the whole world will come together and heal them, that Hashem or God will actually be there and heal them and help them onto a path into a fantastic life and a future that they could have, especially the little babies.
An absolute pleasure to have you back on the Middle East Report. Sharon, you've done a great job. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching today's Middle East Report. I think it's absolutely imperative that we continue to pray for the release of the Israeli hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza so that they can come back to their loved ones, back to their families, and rebuild their lives in peace. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.